May 20, 1945. Fort Dix, New Jersey. A raw Atlantic wind drives rain across the parade ground, turning the packed earth into a mud-slick mirror. Under a sheet of gray sky, 12 buses cough and grind to a halt outside the chain-link perimeter. American MPs move like practiced shadows, Thompson submachine guns slung low, rain darkening the webbing of their gear. The roar of engines and the brief bark of orders cut through the damp air, crisp, efficient, uncompromising. From the rear step of the last bus, a line of men descends slowly, each hand bound with soft rope, each face a study in exhaustion and incredulity. They are German soldiers, blood-dull Feldgrau uniforms clinging to bodies that have known ration rolls and winter marches, boots caked in European mud. Some are young enough that their beards have not yet filled in. Others carry the creased, hollow cheeks of men who have seen too much. Among them is Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, a plain, weathered face under a sodden peaked cap, rain beating on the braided chin strap. His eyes flick once to the American guardhouse, then to the horizon as if measuring distance, weighing what has been lost and what, for a time, might be unexpectedly given. The reception at Fort Dix is quiet and oddly formal. An interpreter steps forward, sergeant stripes on his sleeve, a clipboard in his hand, calling the names in clipped English. Medical officers, faces creased with long nights of duty, move along the line with thermometers and a practiced tenderness that seems foreign to the men in gray. They check wounds, note fevers, hand out blankets that smell faintly of disinfectant. A Red Cross truck idles nearby, its canvas cover peeled back to reveal stacks of neatly wrapped parcels and crates marked with the small, reassuring Red Cross emblem. Then the food begins to appear. A mess sergeant, face flushed from the cold, hauls plates from a steaming pot and sets them before the prisoners on long wooden tables. The first dishes are simple, thick slices of roast beef glazed and steaming, a mound of mashed potatoes whipped to velvet, a ladle of gravy that runs like warm ink across the plate. There are apples, whole, polished to a shine, and oranges with peels that crack with a bright citrus perfume when pulled apart. A thermos is passed along. The coffee inside sends a sharp, bitter steam into the rain. The smell alone seems to unfix something in the men. They stand, unsteady, hands hovering over the trays as if afraid to believe. Oberstfreiter Karl Muller, just 20, fingers a crust of bread with the reverence of someone touching a relic. He looks around at his comrades. The murmurs start low and unbelieving. Fleisch, he whispers, not a command, not a demand, but a single word that tastes like a memory of home, meat. Another man laughs softly, a sound like a cracked bell. Coffee, says another, then catches himself and looks down at his boots as if expecting the earth to open and swallow the food whole. They have been instructed to line up, to strip off the wet outer garments, to stand in ranks while the American cooks move among them with buckets and ladles. The process is bureaucratic and swift, each action recorded in neat handwriting on forms that will later be typed into a ledger. But ritual cannot blunt the shock. The plates are full, the portions generous by the standards these men have known. Where the German soldier at the front has been rationed to ersatz coffee, liver paste, and a thin daily bread allotment, here the portions are heavy and real. A canteen worker, noticing the hesitation, smiles with a practiced gentleness and says in broken German, "Eat. We have plenty." Hauptmann Weber watches his men. He is not moved to immediate gratitude. Gratitude would be a soft thing in a hard world. Instead, he notes, in the sparest voice he can muster, that the food is of a quality that would have been a luxury in many towns back home, towns reduced now to rubble by months of bombing and blockade. He thinks of his wife's letters, the words fading at the edges, of ration coupons clipped and clipped again, of neighbors queuing for bread at dawn. He thinks of the steady diet of propaganda that had told him the enemy would be brutal, yes, but that German civilization would sustain the home front. The war has unspooled those reassurances. Around the table, the older ones trade glances that are more complex than shock. There is shame, for having been captured, for having survived while others starve, and there is a new, sharp curiosity about this strange American abundance. A young lance corporal dares to bite into an orange. The first taste of sun and sugar makes his eyes water. A corporal from a panzer unit, his tunic still smelling faintly of fuel, looks to the sky as if expecting to see the faces of men he knows who are now at home, perhaps dead, perhaps starving. Outside the mess hall, beyond the chain link, Fort Dix performs its other role, a machine of logistics and order. Trucks roll past on churned lanes, crates stamped with U.S. Army Service of Supply clang down, their labels promising beans and bacon, powdered milk and crates of tinned fruit. A quartermaster lieutenant with brass on his collar exchanges a few words with a local civilian supplier, and they talk matter-of-factly of shortages in Europe and how this post must allocate what remains. The normalcy of distribution, a civilian economy married to military precision, only deepens the prisoners' bewilderment. How could those who sent them to war be living in such hunger while here in enemy hands, there is abundance? It will not take long for news to travel. The first letters sent by prisoners back to relatives, censored though they may be, will carry descriptions of food that read like fairy tales to those at home. Coffee steaming in the morning, thick slices of meat, fruit that does not come as a rumor but as a certainty. Already, in the battered inner cities of Germany, mothers clutch ration books while soot flakes from apartment eaves. The contrast between the kitchen tables of Fort Dix and the empty cupboards of a German provincial town is a kind of moral argument written in gravy and salt. For now the men eat. They do so slowly, almost ceremonially. They drink the coffee and share the oranges, passing wedges and stories back and forth in a murmur of German that seems small and human against the enormity of the war that carried them here. Their disbelief will harden into a question that will follow them across the Atlantic. How can enemies keep human decency while their own nation's civilians starve? The question will not be answered in this hall but will echo through letters, interrogations, and the journals these men keep in their pockets. The following morning, sunlight breaks over Fort Dix in a soft amber haze. The rain has lifted, leaving puddles that reflect the high perimeter fence and the fluttering stars and stripes. From the guard tower, a young American private peers down, squinting at the line of German prisoners already assembled for roll call. There's no shouting, no bayonets pressed to backs, only order, precision and routine. The Germans, still dazed from the previous night's meal, stand at attention, their postures stiff but uncertain. Inside the camp, the loudspeakers crackle to life. The voice of Major Harold Jenkins, camp commander, rings through the compound. Attention all personnel and internees. Breakfast formation at 0700. Work assignments to follow. His tone is official but not hostile. For many of the prisoners, the words sound strange. Almost civilized compared to the brutal discipline of the Eastern Front or the suspicion they feared in Allied captivity. The kitchen is alive again. The smell of scrambled eggs and oatmeal fills the mess hall, joined by the familiar hiss of frying bacon, a sound so distinctly American that it borders on surreal. As they line up, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber notices something remarkable. The cooks aren't soldiers. They're civilians, older men in aprons laughing with one another, joking as they serve the same meal to both guards and prisoners. There is no visible hierarchy in the portions handed out. Everyone receives food, warmth, and coffee. For a moment, Weber's military instincts falter. He wonders if this is some kind of trick, a display for propaganda, a momentary show of humanity. But the pattern continues day after day. 3 meals a day. Bread with butter, hot soup, even dessert on occasion. Fruit, milk, vegetables. All of it real. The Geneva Convention had promised fair treatment of prisoners, but few Germans truly believed the Americans would follow it. After years of Goebbels' propaganda, stories of American brutality, of lynchings and barbarism, the sight of smiling guards and steaming food is almost impossible to reconcile. A group of captured Luftwaffe pilots, housed in a separate barracks, are overheard whispering about their disbelief. One of them, Lieutenant Otto Reiner, a young reconnaissance pilot shot down over France, says quietly, "Back home, my mother stands in line for turnips. Here the enemy feeds us like guests." Another, older, shakes his head. "Guests," he says, spitting the word with bitter irony. "We're prisoners, Otto. Don't forget that." Yet when the chow line opens, even he does not hesitate to take his share. Across America, from Camp Ruston in Louisiana to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, similar scenes play out. Captured German troops, more than 370,000 of them, are distributed across nearly 500 camps. They arrive broken, thin, and hardened by years of battle, and they find, to their astonishment, that their captors feed them better than their own army ever did. In Louisiana, camp cooks serve thick slices of cornbread and collard greens alongside roast chicken. In the dusty plains of Texas, German prisoners taste barbecue for the first time. In the northern states, they shovel snow in exchange for hot stew and warm clothing. It is not luxury by American standards, but to men who have survived on black bread and ersatz coffee, it is heaven. Each camp operates under strict rules set by the War Department and the Geneva Convention. Every prisoner is entitled to the same caloric intake as an American soldier. The logic is practical. Fair treatment discourages escapes, ensures labor efficiency, and offers moral superiority over the Axis powers. But to the German POWs, it feels like something else entirely, a quiet act of humanity from a nation that has defeated them. Letters home are censored, but even through the blacked-out lines, fragments of astonishment survive. One writes, "We have meat almost every day." Another says, "I drink real coffee again." And from a camp in Colorado, a sergeant tells his wife, "If you could see what they feed us, you would not believe it. I wish you were here, though that is a terrible thing to say." Meanwhile, back in Germany, the contrast is brutal. In bombed-out cities like Hamburg and Dresden, people queue for hours for a handful of potatoes or a thin loaf of bread. Children scavenge for crumbs among the ruins. Civilians live on less than 1,000 calories a day. The once proud Wehrmacht soldiers, now behind barbed wire in America, eat more, and better, than their families back home. In the camp's recreation yard, a small drama unfolds that captures this tension perfectly. A group of prisoners receives a delivery of mail from Germany. The letters are fragile, covered in censor stamps and written on paper so thin it's almost translucent. One man, a former baker named Hans Keller, sits on the edge of a wooden bench reading slowly. His wife writes of air raids, shortages, and fear. "The children are thin," she says. "The bread is gray now, made of barley and sawdust. We miss you." Hans folds the letter with shaking hands. He looks at the untouched plate in front of him, a sandwich, an apple, a small piece of pie. His eyes fill. He cannot eat. Around him, the others fall silent. They all know what that silence means: guilt. The kind of guilt that comes not from wrongdoing but from survival. That evening in the barracks, a debate stirs among the men. "Do they feed us this way to mock us?" one asks. "To show us our defeat?" Another shakes his head. "No. They feed us because they can." For some, that realization is more painful than any punishment could have been. By late 1945, the Germans in U.S. custody begin to understand that their time in captivity will not be defined by suffering but by introspection. They will work on farms, in factories, even in sawmills, earning small wages and returning each night to full plates. In doing so, they witness a society untouched by scarcity, a society of abundance and structure that stands in stark contrast to the wreckage of their own homeland. And as the lights go out across Fort Dix that night, the men in Barracks 14 lie awake, listening to the sound of distant American trains, freight cars full of food, moving through the darkness toward cities that never starve. For the first time in years they sleep without fear, but not without questions. By June 1945, the routines of life behind the wire at Fort Dix have taken shape, an uneasy rhythm of order, nourishment, and thought. The German prisoners wake each morning to the metallic clang of the camp bell, their movements marked by the discipline of men who have long lived by schedules not their own. But unlike the battlefield, there is no gunfire, no sudden orders shouted in chaos. The only sound now is the scrape of boots on gravel, the murmur of English commands, and the faint hum of America's war machine in the distance. A world in motion even in victory. Each day begins with roll call, then breakfast. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber sits with a small group of his men, spooning oatmeal sweetened with real sugar. They speak softly, still in disbelief. The guards treat them with the same tone they use for one another, firm but never cruel. An American corporal, James Miller, walks the line, checking the order of the mess hall. He's young, perhaps 22, his face still open with the easy calm of someone who has seen victory from afar. When Miller pauses to refill Weber's coffee, the German officer rises out of habit, a reflex born from years of strict hierarchy. Miller just laughs lightly and gestures for him to sit. "Relax, Captain," he says. "Coffee tastes better when you're sitting." The words are simple, but they linger in Weber's mind for the rest of the day. After breakfast, the prisoners are split into work details. Some repair fences or dig drainage ditches. Others are assigned to local farms, escorted beyond the perimeter under watchful eyes. The Geneva Convention allows POW labor, provided it does not directly support the war effort, and in America the war's industrial sprawl needs hands more than ever. The farmers of New Jersey, short on labor since so many young men have gone overseas, welcome the German workers with wary practicality. At first there is silence, only the sound of shovels biting into soil and the low clatter of machinery. But slowly words begin to pass between them. A farmer offers a cigarette. A prisoner offers to fix a broken plow. The barriers of language dissolve under necessity. Weber, now working alongside a small team repairing fences, watches one of his men, Gefreiter Franz Adler, a former schoolteacher from Hamburg, speaking halting English to an American boy of about 10. The child sits on the fence post, curious, unafraid. Adler smiles and points at a bird in the nearby oak, saying the English word for it. The boy repeats it with a grin. In that moment, the war feels impossibly far away. Back in the camp, life takes on small domestic rituals. Prisoners write letters, play soccer, even form orchestras from whatever instruments can be found. The War Department allows this, believing that structured, humane conditions reduce resistance and escape attempts. They are correct. The Germans adapt, but they do not forget. In the evenings, Weber often walks the perimeter, observing the contrast between captivity and calm. Beyond the fence, he can see the lights of American homes, glowing windows, laughter carried faintly on the wind, the sound of a phonograph drifting from somewhere unseen. Inside those homes, families dine without fear of sirens or sudden knocks at the door. They sleep under intact roofs. That peace gnaws at him. Inside the barracks, a conversation begins, a quiet one, but filled with the kind of weight that only men stripped of illusions can share. "Do you remember," asks Muller, "what we were told about them? That they were degenerates? Monsters." He gestures toward the guardhouse, where an American sergeant is handing out blankets. "He's no monster. He's just normal." Weber exhales slowly. "Normal," he repeats, tasting the word like something foreign. "Maybe that's what victory looks like. To keep your normal life while others lose theirs." The others nod silently. For many of them, this is the first time they are allowed, or forced, to think about the meaning of everything they've done and everything they were told. In the days that follow, news begins to trickle into the camp. A few guards mention the Nuremberg trials. Rumors spread of Germany's devastation. Entire cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced. Even the proudest officers fall quiet at the mention of Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin. Weber receives a new letter from home, postmarked from Bavaria. His wife writes of shortages so severe that people have begun to barter their clothes for bread. The local church has been turned into a shelter for bombed-out families. "Our son is thin," she writes. "But we manage. If you are alive, that is enough." That night, Weber cannot bring himself to eat. His men, too, pick at their food, the same plates of roast beef and mashed potatoes that had once seemed like a miracle. Now they taste of guilt. Elsewhere in the camp, others try to find purpose. Some of the younger men volunteer to help in the infirmary, learning English words from medical staff. Others take up painting, carving, or writing, small acts of control in a world that has stripped them of it. A camp chaplain begins offering voluntary English lessons, and surprisingly, dozens of Germans attend. The Americans note their discipline and diligence. To them, these are model prisoners, polite, obedient, industrious. But under that quiet surface, a profound transformation is unfolding. In captivity, the German soldiers have time to think, time to compare, time to question. And what they see in America shakes the foundations of what they believed about freedom, decency, and the enemy. As summer deepens, Fort Dix begins to resemble not a prison, but a strange mirror of the world they left behind, only more ordered, more humane, more stable. Weber walks past the mess hall one evening and sees a sign pinned by an American officer. "Freedom is not a reward for loyalty. It is the ground from which loyalty grows." He stands for a long time staring at it. Somewhere in that sentence, he feels the quiet collapse of everything he had once believed. The men who arrived broken are now beginning to rebuild, not with weapons but with questions. Autumn 1945. The mornings at Fort Dix grow cold. Mist settles over the barbed wire fences and the wooden barracks creak as the prisoners stir awake. But this season brings something heavier than frost: letters. The first reliable mail shipments from Europe have arrived, and for the men inside the camp, each envelope is a fragile bridge to a world they no longer recognize. Captain Friedrich Weber sits on his bunk, an opened envelope trembling in his hands. The paper is thin, worn, and smells faintly of smoke. His wife's handwriting, once elegant, now staggers across the page. She writes of bombings that flatten their street, of ration cards that no longer feed the family, of neighbors lost to hunger or despair. Her final line pierces through the noise of the barracks: "You live as a prisoner, but you are safer than we who are free." Across from him, Franz Adler, the former schoolteacher, stares blankly at his own letter. His parents' house in Hamburg has been reduced to ashes. His sister is missing. The Americans in the barracks, sensing the sudden shift in mood, say little. The usual chatter of breakfast fades into silence as the prisoners process the cruel irony. Here, behind barbed wire, they are warm, fed, and alive, while their families at home starve in ruins. Weber folds the letter and sets it carefully beneath his pillow. He cannot eat that morning. When Corporal James Miller passes by, coffee pot in hand, Weber merely nods, his face pale and distant. The young American hesitates, sensing something wrong. Bad news? He asks softly. Weber doesn't answer, but the look in his eyes says everything. That evening the camp feels subdued. No soccer games. No laughter. Just men sitting on cots, rereading words they wish they hadn't received. Some weep quietly. Others stare into space as if the paper in their hands contains a wound they cannot close. The camp chaplain, Father Thomas Reed, notices the change. He walks the rows of bunks, offering conversation rather than scripture. You know, he says to Adler, my brother fought in France. He didn't come home. I hate this war too. The words surprise Adler, not for their sympathy but for their honesty. He had not expected an American to admit pain. In the mess hall, whispers spread. Some men question how their families could suffer while they, the defeated, receive meat, potatoes, even fruit. A few mutter bitterly about hypocrisy, others about shame. Weber listens but says nothing. Instead he stares at his plate, untouched. Later that night he gathers a few of his closest men, Adler, Muller, and 2 others, and sits by the barracks stove. We are safe here, he begins slowly. But at what cost? We fought for an idea that promised to make us strong. And now our people starve while we eat the enemy's bread. Muller clenches his jaw. We were told America was decadent, he mutters. Yet they treat us better than Berlin ever treated its own. Weber looks up. That's the part one cannot understand. Adler's voice is quiet. Perhaps it's because they can afford mercy. The conversation fades into silence. Outside, the faint hum of a generator mingles with the whisper of wind through the fences. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoes, a sound that reminds them of transport convoys, of endless movement, of war without end. Days turn into weeks and more letters arrive. Reports from Germany grow bleaker. Bread lines stretch for blocks. Coal shortages force families to burn furniture for warmth. The men begin sending what little they can, small portions of cigarettes or handmade trinkets, smuggled through sympathetic guards or the Red Cross. It's futile, but it makes them feel human again. In mid-November, the camp loudspeaker crackles with an announcement. Attention! Germany's winter relief program reports severe famine conditions across several cities. POW donations through the Red Cross are now permitted. A murmur runs through the barracks. That night, dozens of men line up at the camp office, handing over parts of their rations. The Americans are astonished, not because the prisoners give but because they insist on it. Corporal Miller later writes to his mother about the moment. They say there are enemies, he notes, but you should have seen them tonight. Hungry men giving away food they didn't have to. Maybe war makes fools of us all. Through winter, a strange duality defines Fort Dix. Snow blankets the camp, softening the hard edges of the fences. Inside, the prisoners decorate their barracks for Christmas using scrap paper and cloth. The guards allow it, even helping string makeshift lights. On Christmas Eve, Father Reed holds a bilingual mass. Germans and Americans sit side by side, their breath visible in the cold air as they sing Silent Night in 2 languages. When the service ends, Weber steps outside, looking up at the stars. Somewhere beyond them lies a Germany he no longer recognizes, a homeland defeated not just by arms, but by hunger and despair. For the first time, he feels something that is neither anger nor pride. It is clarity. He realizes that captivity has given him a kind of freedom. The freedom to see truth without the noise of propaganda, to feel shame without fear, to recognize the humanity of those he once called the enemy. The war for him is truly over. But outside the camp, the world is still rebuilding, and for the men behind the wire the question remains, what will become of them when the fences come down? Spring 1946. The frost melts from the Alabama hills, and Fort Dix prepares for something it hasn't done since the war began: send its prisoners home. Word spreads quickly through the barracks. Repatriation. The men can hardly believe it. 4 months they had lived in limbo, unsure whether they would be kept as laborers, tried as war criminals, or forgotten entirely. Now trains are being assembled. Manifests are being readied. The barbed wire that once symbolized their captivity will soon be nothing more than a memory. But with that news comes something unexpected: hesitation. In the mess hall, Captain Friedrich Weber sits across from Franz Adler, pushing his food around his plate. You should be happy, Adler says softly. Home at last. Weber shakes his head. Home, he repeats, the word heavy. But what is home now? The cities are rubble. My wife, she hasn't written in weeks. My brother's gone. What am I returning to? Adler nods, silent. Around them, laughter and chatter fill the air. Men joking, packing, trading cigarettes, dreaming aloud about seeing their families again. Yet beneath the noise there's a strange unease. For months, even years, the camp had become its own kind of world. Safe, structured, predictable. Returning to Germany meant facing a country broken in ways none of them could yet comprehend. That afternoon, the guards begin distributing discharge papers. Corporal James Miller, the young American who once served coffee to the prisoners, helps organize the line. He watches as Weber approaches, older, leaner, but calmer somehow. "Captain Weber," Miller says, handing over the papers. "Guess this is it." Weber offers a faint smile. "Yes. You've been decent to us. More than I expected." Miller shrugs. "Orders were simple, treat you how we'd want to be treated." Turns out that wasn't so hard. The two men share a brief handshake, an act that months earlier would have seemed impossible. In the barracks, the prisoners pack what little they own: handmade carvings, notebooks, scraps of letters. Some fold their American-issued blankets neatly, almost reverently, leaving them behind. Others pocket small mementos: a spoon, a photograph with a guard, even a baseball cap from the camp team. At dawn, the trains arrive. Long rows of boxcars, each marked repatriation, POW. The men line up, their boots crunching against the gravel. U.S. military police oversee the boarding process, calling names in steady, practiced voices. Before stepping aboard, Weber pauses and turns back toward the camp. The fences glint in the morning light, the towers empty, the guardhouse door swinging gently in the wind. He had arrived here broken, angry, and proud. He leaves as something else entirely, humbled, uncertain, but undeniably changed. "Captain Weber." Adler calls from the next car. "Coming or not?" Weber nods, taking one last look at the place that had given him both confinement and clarity. "Ja," he murmurs. "I'm coming." The train lurches forward, its whistle echoing across the hills. Through the open slats of the boxcar, the men watch the camp shrink into the distance until it's nothing but a blur. The journey eastward takes weeks. Across the Atlantic, ships carry thousands of German POWs back to their homeland under the supervision of Allied escorts. On deck, Weber stands by the railing, staring at the gray expanse of ocean. The wind cuts cold against his face, but he doesn't mind. For the first time in years, he feels the stirrings of freedom, but it is a freedom laced with guilt. One evening, Adler joins him. "When we get back," he says quietly, "what will you do?" Weber doesn't answer right away. "Find my wife if she's still alive. Then, perhaps teach. Not about war. About truth." Adler smiles faintly. "Truth. That will be new for Germany." The two men stand in silence, watching the sea swallow the horizon. When they finally reach Bremerhaven, the air is thick with coal smoke and decay. The docks are crowded with returnees, hollow-eyed men in tattered uniforms, civilians searching faces in vain. Germany is a ghost of itself. American officers guide the POWs through processing stations. Each man receives a ration card, a medical check, and a terse reminder: you are now free. But you are responsible for rebuilding your nation. Weber steps off the gangway and into the ruins of his homeland. Buildings lie gutted, trees stripped bare. Children in ragged clothes watch silently from the alleys. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, faint, hesitant, like a memory. As he walks through the wreckage, Weber feels the weight of his time in America pressing against the devastation around him. He remembers the meals, the warmth, the civility, luxuries that now feel obscene against the backdrop of starvation. At a relief station, he finds a loaf of bread, coarse and half-burnt. He tears it in half and gives the larger piece to a barefoot boy waiting nearby. The child looks up, confused but grateful. Weber smiles weakly. You'll need it more than I do." That night, he sleeps in a bombed-out train station beside dozens of others. In the flickering candlelight, he reads the last page of his wife's final letter once more. Then, folding it carefully, he closes his eyes and whispers to the empty air. "America fed us when my own nation could not. May I never forget what that means." Winter, 1947. A small classroom in Stuttgart buzzes softly with the sound of chalk against a blackboard. The students, thin, pale, dressed in patched clothes, sit attentively as Friedrich Weber, now wearing a plain gray jacket, writes the word, dignity, in neat cursive. "This," he says, turning toward them, "is what we lost during the war, and what we must learn again." The room is silent. Outside, the faint sound of hammers and construction echoes through the ruined streets. The rubble of the old world is giving way to something new, slower, humbler, but built with human hands rather than ideology. For Weber, life after captivity is one of quiet reconstruction. He teaches at a small community school, a post assigned by the American military administration. Each day he walks through a city still scarred by bomb craters, where food is rationed and black market cigarettes serve as currency. Yet beneath the gray sky, there's a flicker of rebirth, bakeries reopening, church bells ringing again, laughter in the streets. At night, Weber writes in a worn leather journal, the same one he started at Camp Aliceville. On its yellowed pages, he records everything: the meals they were given, the guards who treated them fairly, the games they played to stay sane. But more than anything, he writes about the question that never leaves him. How could we, who believed ourselves the master race, be shown humanity by those we called our enemies? Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in towns like Huntsville, Fort Dix, and Camp Swift, the POW camps stand empty. The barbed wire fences sag, watchtowers stripped of searchlights. American farmers and local communities who once hosted the prisoners remember them not with hatred, but curiosity, even affection. In Alabama, a woman named Margaret Lawson, whose family farm employed German POWs during the war, keeps a photograph pinned to her kitchen wall. 3 young Germans smiling in work clothes, one of them holding a basket of peaches. People thought they'd be monsters, she tells a visiting journalist years later. But they were just boys. Hungry, scared boys. Her story mirrors hundreds of others. In Texas, a former POW named Carl Hoffman writes letters to the family of a guard who once gave him an English dictionary. In Illinois, a group of returning prisoners sends money to the small-town church that hosted their Sunday services. Across oceans and languages, threads of decency quietly weave themselves into the fabric of post-war reconciliation. But in Germany, things are not so simple. Many returning POWs are met with suspicion, branded as failures, even traitors, for having lived too well under American care. In one village near Frankfurt, Weber attends a gathering of veterans. The mood is bitter, the air thick with resentment. "They pampered you," one man spits, his face red with drink. "While we froze in the east, you ate like kings." Weber's jaw tightens. "We ate because they let us. And perhaps they fed us to show us what we'd lost." The room goes quiet. Someone mutters, "Lost what?" "Our soul," Weber says simply. No one answers. Later that night, he walks home alone through the cold streets. Above him, American supply planes rumble faintly through the clouds, part of the new Marshall Plan deliveries that are rebuilding what the bombs destroyed. Germany is being fed again, this time by the same hands that once held it captive. Weber stops beneath a half-collapsed church. Snow drifts through the roofless nave, landing on the marble altar. He removes his hat, closes his eyes, and lets the silence settle over him. Years pass. The scars of the war begin to fade, though never completely. Children grow up hearing stories of the B-17 raids, the hunger winters, and the day the Americans came, but also of the strange kindness that existed within captivity. In 1952, Weber receives a letter from James Miller, the young American guard who once handed him discharge papers. The envelope bears a Texas return address. Inside, a few typed lines. "Captain Weber, I saw a story about German teachers rebuilding the schools. Made me think of you. I hope your country finds peace. We tried to show you that mercy isn't weakness. Maybe someday we'll both believe that." Weber reads the letter several times. Then, reaching for his pen, he writes back. "Sergeant Miller, you taught me that the measure of a man is not in what he destroys but what he spares. I pray my students will understand that someday. Thank you." He seals the envelope, walks to the nearest post box and slides it in, a small act, almost unnoticeable. Yet in that moment, it feels as though the last remnants of the war finally lift from his shoulders. Decades later, as historians examine the POW experience in America, they find something remarkable. Of the 425,000 German prisoners who lived on U.S. soil, almost none attempted escape. Many described their captivity not with bitterness, but with gratitude. For them, America was not just the land of the enemy, it was the land that showed them decency when their own nation could not. In his final journal entry, dated 1963, Weber writes, "I was a soldier of a nation that believed mercy was weakness. But behind the wire, I learned the opposite, that mercy is the last defense of civilization. When they fed us, they didn't just fill our stomachs. They reminded us that humanity is not conquered by war. It survives it." The ink trails off mid-sentence, the handwriting trembling. Beneath it, in faded pencil, is a single word, "Danke." And somewhere in Alabama, long after the last camp was torn down, a farmer's field still yields rich harvests, the soil quietly nourished by the hands of the men who once tilled it as prisoners, and who left as human beings again.